This video is sponsored by Private Internet Access. Stick around to the end to find out more. I started getting a lot of these comments recently. Things like, is this AI? Or how do I know that you're real? Or what if all of this is fake? Some people, not a lot of people, but enough people that I started to notice have been suspicious. They even thought that I might be AI. And I tried to think about how you would convince somebody of this. How would you convince them that you're real? You know, I have random stuff that sits on my desk. I have this pack of playing cards. Can't really remember why they're in my office, but they're here. I have this bottle cap from a seltzer that I was drinking. I also have a copy of the January 12th New Yorker from this year. Maybe that's more convincing than others. But frankly, trying to convince people that you're real is long and boring and likely to be unsuccessful. There will always be some people who are a little bit suspicious. And here's the truth. They're right to be suspicious. Not about me. I promise you that I'm real, but about the fact that many of the images and things that you will see online are fake. And I think this is having a larger effect than we typically realize. It's not just that things on the internet feel fake. Just kind of everything feels fake now. The art and entertainment we consume are increasingly becoming unreal. Politics can feel like a confusing mess of stories, and there are plenty of people who are also just outright lying. You'll hear people say that the economy feels like it's made up. Whenever we encounter something, but especially when we encounter it online, we have to ask ourselves, is this real? And in a world that feels fake, we're all suspicious. We don't know who we can trust, and we certainly don't trust each other. So take a look at this video. Every once in a while, you will see a video like this go massively viral on YouTube. It's a whole genre. It's usually an older person looking directly at the camera, usually without a great setup, and they're just dispensing some wisdom that they've accrued. Maybe they're talking about the things in their life that they regret, and they're just trying to share what they've learned from their mistakes to help younger people, so maybe they don't make those same mistakes. I see these videos crop up every couple of months, and I think one of the reasons they're so appealing is that they feel so authentic. At the time of recording, this video has 3.7 million views. But if you watch it, you'll see, I think very quickly, that it's an AI video. In the description, the creator behind the channel says that the stories are fictionalized and the images are AI generated. It's all made up. Now, fiction can be a very powerful way of transmitting truths. I personally think that you will learn just as much sometimes from reading a novel that you would from reading a work of philosophy or reading some other kind of nonfiction. In fact, I would often tell people that they should just read more novels. But what's so weird about this video and all of the videos like it, because once you start looking for them, you will find them, is that it relies on performing authenticity. It mimics authenticity, and that's why those videos feel so emotionally impactful. I think that this video is obviously AI. I could tell in maybe about 3 seconds, as soon as I heard the voice and saw the way the lighting looked, my sort of AI suspicions started going crazy. But I scrolled through the comments and I saw that a lot of people were engaging with the video as if it were real. Some of them were thanking the old man for sharing his wisdom, saying that he helped them avoid mistakes and that they were going to do the best they could to follow his example. Sometimes people would point out that it was AI and people would actually express shock. They hadn't realized it was AI until somebody told them. Though not everyone, some people just don't care that it's fake. But let's focus on the fact that quite a few people didn't realize that it was AI. I think that I'm pretty decent at telling when something is AI, but you can't really trust yourself here. So I started to look and see if there was any research on it. And there's a growing field of research where people are looking into the question of how reliable human beings are at spotting whether or not something is fake. In May of 2025, some researchers who work for Microsoft released a paper on Archive looking into exactly this question. They analyzed 12,500 players playing a game of Real or Not with 287,000 images. And they found that the success rate for spotting AI images was 62%. The way the game is structured, they only had 2 options. They could either choose real or artificial. If you flipped a coin, you would expect to get about 50% right. So human beings only do modestly better than chance at spotting AI images. The researchers wrote in their conclusion, "We suggest that most generative AI models nowadays can produce photorealistic images without visible defects." Some images are easier to detect than others. It turns out human beings are a little bit better at detecting fake human faces. That might be because of some innate ability we have for facial recognition. I did go looking for other studies and I found a few. Across those studies, a consistent theme emerged. Human beings are not that good at figuring out what is real and what is fake. We're better at determining that videos are fake than we are individual images. That was in one study that I read, but the overall trend was that we aren't as good as we'd like to think we are.
While I was editing this video, I decided it would be a good idea for me to take the quiz too, you have to take 15 images and rate them, and it turns out that I actually did worse than most people. So I thought I was pretty good at spotting AI images, but my success rate was only 53%.
Essentially, we are moving into a world where deepfakes, those are images of real human beings, are going to become harder to spot. The first major article about deepfakes was published in 2017 by Motherboard. I don't want to get demonetized, so I'm not going to go into a lot of details about this. It's a pretty sordid story, though it's linked below for anyone who wants to go and read it for themselves. The article highlighted how new machine learning technology, and remember this was back in 2017, could be used to generate images or videos of celebrities in compromising scenarios. There was a lot of concern about deepfakes after that, but it didn't really materialize for a couple of years. The technology just hadn't caught up. It took close to another decade for it to become an actual problem. But that's where we are right now. In a nutshell, here's the problem. Any image you see online could be fake. And that includes images of real human beings that you might otherwise recognize. And one thing I'm really curious about is if human beings are going to get better or worse at spotting AI images as we see more and more of the internet start to get flooded with this stuff. My sense is that we're actually going to get worse, but that's an open question. Now, concerns about AI are almost always reflections about concerns that are much older. One of my beliefs is that most human problems are not very new. They're old ones that just keep cropping up in new forms. And so I usually think that it's helpful to go back and look at history a little bit to gain some perspective. Now, when photography became widespread, people became very concerned about whether or not photographs were really reflecting reality. In the 1920s and 30s, the New York Evening Graphic used a technique called composite photography to produce something called cosmographs. A cosmograph essentially is when you stitch together multiple images to make a composite image. They would use actors and stage props and other aids to try and create scenes of some scandal that could then be printed in the newspaper. And because these were obviously staged and, heavily altered, they're what we nowadays would just call fakes. And even prior to that, newspapers would have drawings made of events, sometimes based on photographs. That's because photographs weren't particularly easy to print, so they would have to use drawings and copies. But to make the pictures look better, like better for the page, which also meant, making them look more dramatic, artists would add what we would politely call embellishments. Around that time, an editor of a photography magazine put it really simply: everybody fakes. Now, I learned about that when I was reading an article from the philosopher Justin Habgood-Koot. And in that article, Habgood-Koot is exploring what the history of manipulating photographs can teach us about the problems that we face with deepfakes today. And he writes, "What we are facing is not an unprecedented historical threat, but the latest episode in an ongoing debate about the proper place of manipulation in recording techniques. As soon as we had recordings, we started messing with them, which basically means that we started faking it as soon as we could. But we like to think of photography as some way to accurately reflect the world or to capture the truth. You point a camera at a scene, you take a picture, and now you have an accurate representation of what the world was like at that moment in time." This is related to something that philosophers like to call testimony. Very roughly, this just names this phenomenon where we learn about the world because people tell us about it. I don't know if it's cold outside, and I ask my wife, she tells me it's cold outside. I've learned that by testimony. But because people like to lie sometimes, we can't always think about testimony as reliable. Another philosopher, Regina Rini, writes that this is a place where recordings seem to be especially valuable to us. And when she's talking about recordings, she means audio or visual recordings of any kind. If we know we're being recorded, Rini says, we're less likely to lie, and that's because we can always be checked. Rini even draws a comparison where we're not sure about something that we're arguing about, so we go and check the tape. You see this in professional sports all the time. Rini thinks that the widespread use of recordings actually makes us more honest, including politicians. I don't know if that's true, but it's what she says in the paper I'm talking about, which, along with all of my other sources, is linked down below. If we can generally rely on recordings, this provides what she calls an epistemic backstop. Epistemic just means like relating to knowledge, and a backstop is just something that prevents failure. It's like a safety net for our testimonial practices. In other words, we can use recordings as a way of keeping people honest because we assume that recordings offer us an honest representation of the world. Picture will describe an event, a video would do an even better job by providing more context, and an audio recording will give you, verifiable evidence of what someone actually said. One of the most painful things about being on the internet and posting a lot of videos is that sometimes people can say, well, in 2004, you said this, and they can always just go and check the tape. Sometimes that includes embarrassing mistakes. There's always a record that people can go and check. We have now entered a world where you can just use certain technologies to create deepfakes of pretty much anybody you want doing anything you want. Recently, OpenAI released a new app called Sora. They released it as an independent app, and users just flooded in to start making AI videos. And very quickly, those videos broke containment and then were presented all over the internet. Guys riding alligators or giant cats pooping in the road, all sorts of nonsense like that. Most of those looked obviously fake. Some people, like Sam Altman, have actually given permission to Sora to create images of themselves and to create videos from scratch. Some celebrities have done this too. And you can just go on there and make a video about basically anything that you want. I was testing this and I asked Sora to make a video of Sam Altman smashing a data center. I even asked it to yell "death to AI."
Death to AI!
It came out all right. Like, if you didn't look at it too closely, for a moment, you might think that it's real, even though the hands do look pretty weird still. And then I made another one of Sam Altman meeting diplomats in a ballroom, and they're handing him piles of gold.
For having me. This place is unbelievable.
It's an honor to meet you. Welcome.
Wow.
These are
Real?
Long live Sam Altman.
I don't even know what to say. Thank you all. This is incredible.
This is less believable, but it looks a lot like Sam Altman, I would say. And then I made something even more unbelievable, which was a video of Jake Paul apologizing.
It's Jake. Just want to take a second to apologize. Over the years, I've done things, said things, hurt people, selfish, chasing clout, not thinking about the impact my actions had on anyone else. I'm sorry to everyone I let down. I'm trying to grow.
And no one would ever believe that's real, but it does look kind of real, right? Now, I want to say a couple of things here in case people are getting a little bit worried. One, I do not use AI tools like that to create images or anything like that that you would see on screen. These were created just to show as examples. Two, if you're really worried about the water usage, I won't take a shower for a few days and I think it'll balance out. And three, I only used AI to make those videos of people who had told OpenAI that it was okay. So I only did it to people who had explicitly consented. I'm just saying that to be very clear about my usage of AI in this video. One of the reasons that you might think some of these videos look fake is because of something I noted earlier, namely that we're pretty good at spotting whether or not human faces are real. So I did make one or two more videos to see if I could make something that was harder to spot as a fake, just using regular prompts in Sora. So I asked for CCTV footage of a woman sitting in front of a restaurant and then a car crash happening and the woman just being totally uninterested in it. And this is what I got.
Guess I'll take it to go.
Now, I think that footage looks pretty convincing. I mean, maybe you can spot things that tell you that it's fake, but more people wouldn't. And that's because I designed it in a way that you wouldn't be looking really closely at facial features or hands or the sorts of tells and signals we rely on to spot if something is fake. And the fact that we can create videos that are looking more and more realistic and are probably going to fool more and more people is why we have seen this, spread of this mindset where someone could watch a video of a guy just sitting at a desk and talking to a camera, and they have to ask whether or not this is real. Everything feels fake because there's an actual risk of it being fake. And remember those research papers I talked about at the beginning of the video? One of those papers noted that positive affect was correlated with getting fooled by AI. What this means, roughly, is that if you are in a good mood, you are more likely to be duped. People who were sad or in distress were actually better at being skeptical about those images, and they had slightly higher success rates at spotting AI images. I think this might be one of the reasons why people don't immediately tell that AI motivational videos are fake. They are watching those videos to feel good, and if feeling good makes you worse at spotting AI, well, then you're just not going to notice, or maybe it's just like that you don't want to notice that the thing you're watching is actually fake. That's just speculation on my part, though. The terrible idea that this brings is that on the internet, you might be better off if you aren't happy. And on top of that, every time you get on the internet, you need to be skeptical. And this is different than those old photojournalism days where everybody was faking it. Because in fact, not that many people were faking it. The technology that was needed to create composite photography was out of reach for many people, and they wouldn't have the skills necessary to do it even if they had access to the photographs. These new technologies aren't themselves like a new problem, but a problem of scale. Anyone with a laptop or a smartphone and has access to these apps is basically able to go and start making fairly convincing AI, deepfakes immediately. And over time, I suspect that they are just going to become more and more convincing. And this is why Regina Rini thinks that we are headed towards a fairly dark future, a future where we can't rely on recordings as an epistemic backstop anymore. And if we can't rely on recordings, then we are going to trust each other less. And I think if you were looking for a big takeaway from this video, which is not mostly about AI, the rest of this video really is not about AI, this would be the takeaway. If we live in a world where everything feels fake, we become suspicious and we become untrusting, and it gets harder for us to live together. But I think it's going to get even weirder than that, because right now we are making art look less like reality, and then we are trying to make reality look more like that art. Now, I wanted to talk about the fact that movies and images don't feel real anymore in this video. And I realized I knew some people who I could talk to about that instead. So I sat down with a couple of people and asked them some questions. Thomas, thanks for talking to me today.
Thanks, Jared. Always happy to discuss any of these things. The intersection of all the stuff you're talking about and movies is kind of exactly the area I live at currently. So this is definitely up my wheelhouse.
I mean, let me just ask you, to start. Movies feel different than they used to. If I think about the films of my childhood, I grew up in the 90s, or classic films from the 70s. Movies today feel different, and in some sense feel less real, or as I'm saying throughout the video, they feel more fake. They feel artificial. That might be the better word for it. And you and a few other people that I'm going to talk to have thought about this a little bit. So I mean, what's your sort of first take on what changed about the way that art and film are presented to us?
I wish I had a very simple answer to this, but my read is that it's a bunch of tiny changes that have happened over the last several decades in film specifically that have led to kind of this shift towards something that feels more artificial. There's big obvious stuff within that, like the shift from film to digital, which there's been some research done on that matter that articulates how we perceive the images created by digital cameras as being slightly less real than the ones that are produced by celluloid, especially if they're captured onto film and then projected through film back onto a screen. There's some good research that shows that there's something about that specifically that we perceive as being very tangibly real, and we don't have that in quite the same way with digital images. Mm-hmm. So there's bigger, more obvious things like that we can point to, but I think it's stuff like that in combination with a bunch of other factors like the simultaneous proliferation of much more affordable visual effects, computer generated imagery throughout filmmaking over the same period of time. Maybe some shifts in kind of the stories we're telling, where I think, if you look at film, you can kind of see this trajectory that I've articulated in some of my videos, from a modernist style of storytelling through a more postmodernist, and then into what I would now describe as a meta-modernist style of storytelling. And so there's almost this folding in on itself. It's become, a lot of the stories have become very self-referential, based on IP and these other things that sort of extract a lot of their meaning from already being related to other media entities that we are familiar with. So that's a few of them, but I think there's many factors that have kind of like grouped together to create this constellation that, the end result is you watch a movie and yeah, it feels a little less real than, they used to in a way that's hard to put a finger on.
Since I was talking to Thomas specifically about why movies feel fake now, of course that meant that we had to talk about something called realism.
Well, there's two different things we can talk about. There's realism, that is a stylistic language which communicates something that has the feeling of reality, and then there's another type of realism that is, it feels more real because it reflects actual pieces of reality. There's a sense of trying to retain or build a film in a way that reflects reality as much as possible, and then trusting that reality comes through the filmmaking process and is conveyed to the viewer. And I think often it is. So if you have, little pieces of reality, then the audience can feel that most of the time, even if they can't describe to you exactly what they're feeling or why.
Yeah, I think that first sense of realism is interesting because it's a weird term for it, actually. We call it realism. Realism in this sense isn't about capturing every detail that might be sort of objectively present in the world, but is actually about mimicking human subjectivity if they were perceiving the scene. Yes. So it's like if I were where the camera is, what would I see? And that's what was striking to me when I was looking over photos that are taken. Like, so I have an iPhone, and if you take something with a portrait setting, it starts blurring the background out, right? Adding sort of false bokeh. At first, when that happened, I was like, oh, how cool. It's like an expensive lens doing this for me, right? But I especially once I had kids and I would like take photos of them, I like didn't like it for some reason, because I was like, you've artificially isolated my children from the things they were doing.
Yeah.
And this, I took the photo because I wanted to remember this moment of my kid doing something. And now the photo doesn't match my own like sort of subjective perception of my kid doing that thing. And so now the photo is worse in my mind.
To bring up something that your iPhone example made me think of, I think one of the things that's interesting to me about this subject is the idea that what you want an image to look like, or what is valuable to us in an image stylistically or artistically, the features of it, the artifice of it, or the realism of it, is all about the context of what it's being used for and the purpose of it. And sometimes things like our phones take away that agency a little bit when they're making some of those choices. But ultimately, in filmmaking, it's about what are you trying to do with these images for the story? The internet, I think, is also really interesting, where, how we think about a space like, let's say, Instagram, and the images that we put on there. And there, are we telling a story, or is it a document of reality? And that's where things get really kind of messy in a fascinating way to me, where, we might be looking at other people's photos and perceiving them as documents of reality, when in fact, we're very far from realism, or they're doctored, or they're filtered, or we have even just the portrait mode on. We think like, oh, I'm taking that picture with the camera, so it's real because I'm not doing anything to it. But as you're saying, the camera itself in your iPhone is already doing all these things. And then we post that onto Instagram as, in this context of, this is representing the reality of my life in some way. But often that's just as much of a constructed fiction as a movie is.
I wanted to continue the conversation, so I also sat down with Tom from Like Stories of Old. Recently, he released a video on why movies feel fake now, which I thought was incredibly helpful for understanding this issue. And so I just asked him, why is it that when I watch movies now, they don't feel real?
I basically had the exact same feeling that you did, and which I think a lot of people had, and I think that's in part why the video did so well, is because so many people had that sort of vague, gnawing sense that something was different. At some point I was just watching through some older movies, like from the 60s and 70s, and I talk about this in the video, but there's one thing that stuck out to me, and that was the focus, which was often, in a lot of older movies, you can often see the background is just clearly in focus. You can see every little bit, whereas nowadays, a lot of it, if you have like a medium shot, even like the shot, like the way I'm filming myself right now, the way you're filming yourself right now, the backgrounds are kind of blurred out, and it's hard to tell like what's going on in the background aside from like kind of a visual mush of an idea. And that initially became like the starting point, like, oh, why are these movies looking so differently from each other, even though, there's, or what's the philosophy behind it, or what was driving that?
One important thing, though, is that Tom does not think it's just because we started using digital cameras.
I think it's just the feeling of physicality that is very important, and that is, I think it is true to some extent that digital is more susceptible to that, because when you're filming in digital, you're filming in like this raw log format usually. That's just this kind of grayscale that manages to capture like the most information, and then only afterwards the filmmakers are like, okay, we're gonna turn up the contrast there, we're gonna make this brown a little bit more greenish or whatever, because you can do so much in post-production that also affects how things are made during pre-production, because when you're like, okay, we're not yet sure what this is gonna look like, it's easier to say, like, for example, we're gonna do a very flat lighting, we're not gonna make a very strong decision on the day of shooting, but we're not going to make a strong decision on the set itself. We're just going to do it bland and then push those decisions till later. And I think in that sort of process, you kind of lose, or I think there has been lost, a kind of connection to just the present materiality of the image, which made me pay more attention, like, okay, where does that feeling of realness, or where did that feeling of realness come from, really? That's when I just kind of realized it was more about the way the filmmakers included more like physicality in the world of the image itself, or in the world of the story, instead of just kind of doing a simple medium shot of one character, then a shot of another when they're talking. Like, there's more space around the characters. There's people that's moving around, they're interacting more with the environment, and that's obviously something you're not seeing as much when you're just throwing up a green screen very cheaply and then editing in some background later. Then there's no interaction unless you make a conscious decision for those interactions to be there, which is something that James Cameron, I think, does very well. And that's something that, classic filmmakers who were shooting on location and shooting with real elements also did kind of naturally really well.
The film grain's really interesting because people will add film grain to digital film to like invoke a feeling, which I usually actually like how it looks. I often think it when done well, right? That's always the big caveat with this. But I guess one of the reasons that it seems to work so well for like a film set in the 70s is that I have never directly interacted with the 70s.
Yeah.
And so when I have interacted with the 70s indirectly, it's through photos or films. So in some ways, like mimicking the grain that I would have seen. So like in my head, the colors of the 70s are different and the texture of the 70s are different, but that's because I already was interacting with it through some form of media.
But I'd say, like, the funny thing is, like, I also wasn't born in the 70s, but I did grow up in like the 90s and the zeros. And if I look back at the images of that time, that's the very early digital tapes and videos, like, that does feel sort of true to the time, even though I lived through those times. And I know that reality back then didn't look as it looked on like the crappy video cameras that we had back then. And I think even then, like, I was a kid, I had like a little digital camera, and I used to film some stuff, just like family holidays with it. And I was always like disappointed with the way it looked, because I felt like, oh, this is a crappy image and it doesn't look as great as some other greater filmmakers are clearly capable of doing. But for some reason, like, looking back at that footage now, it has gained a sort of truth over time, because it does. In some way, it feels like it now better reflects the memory I have of that time, even though it doesn't look like like how it was to actually live through it. So I guess that's just also a little bit how nostalgia works, and how, the past is wherever you're coming from is always remembered with some sort of filter that separates you from it. But it's interesting how each era will have their own sort of look that we'll later look back on and see as the sort of the true image of that time, even though it obviously didn't look anything like it, and that was just the way cameras, or that's where the technology was at the time.
There was this common theme that emerged in both of these conversations, which is that the media that we use to document the world or to portray it actually affect what we think the world should look like. So if we are making movies look less real using weird things about depth and perception and lighting, well, this also has this weird effect where we now want to make images of ourselves look like the kind of media that we're already consuming. So every time you take a picture on your phone, it will quickly process the photo to try and make it look better. Better here means to look more like it's been tailored by the people who wrote the software. They get to decide, sort of what looks better in this context. It can change your skin tone, it can sharpen blurry images, it can alter the lighting, and it's all in service of making photos or images that look more pleasant to the eye. But often when I look at photos that have been taken with an iPhone or with a Pixel or any other smartphone, I think that they look kind of fake. The processing is really obvious, and so it can seem like a distortion of reality. But you would only be able to think that they look fake if you have a reference point you can compare them to. And if you mostly see yourself through the lens of a camera that has already done this kind of digital processing, well, then your self-image is going to change. It's going to change what you think you look like, or it's going to change what you think you should look like. In an article for the journal Body Image, some researchers found that using things like appearance-enhancing filters on TikTok was associated with an increasing disapproval of how you looked. The more and more that you use these filters, you would have greater dissatisfaction with your appearance. The research on this is still quite new, and so I do think we have to be careful about drawing too many conclusions, and obviously more research is needed, but it does seem to be the beginnings of a theory about what using filters all the time does to a person. And I think we're seeing some evidence of this out in the real world, at least for the idea that the social media that we are consuming is changing what we think we should look like. There are plastic surgeries that go viral on TikTok, and that could change how people perceive themselves. And if enough people start to look a certain way, that in people's minds becomes the new normal. That's because what we consider normal is based on what we're used to. If something seems familiar, eventually it just becomes what we consider to be normal. And if we mostly see human faces that have been processed through filters, we start to think that regular, unprocessed, natural human faces are actually the ones that look weird. And people change their appearance all the time. I mean, I guess in some way you could describe changing your outfit or getting a new haircut as a way to make yourself look fake, but I think there is a difference here between these kind of radical alterations to your appearance and the sort of ordinary kind of grooming that we all do to present ourselves to the world. And that's that a lot of this stuff, I think, looks more like AI images than like a natural human being. So we're creating realistic fake images with AI, and then we're starting to make ourselves look like we ourselves are AI generated. And the boundaries between what is fake and what is real start to blur. It doesn't help too that some platforms have started processing videos in the name of making it look better. I put better in quotes there because I think it does look awful. One place you might have noticed this was here on YouTube, especially on the Shorts feed. YouTube said that they were processing those as a way of sharpening images. But the result was that many videos that were actually real, maybe they were clips from older videos, started to look like they had been processed heavily through AI. I saw some videos, I think directly from Rick Beato interviewing. Hey buddy. Hey buddy, what's up? He's okay, Mungya. Hey buddy. Oh, don't step on that. Hey, Dada's recording, okay? It's okay, go to mama, okay? The example that comes to mind here, because I think really YouTube did. One person who I thought really was just done dirty by YouTube and all of this was Rick Beato, who posts clips of interviews with his, these great musicians. And I saw this interview with him and Les Claypool. If I can find the video I'm talking about, I'll show it on the screen. But the way that YouTube processed this made him look like an AI guy talking to an AI bass player, which is a real shame because, Rick does these in-person interviews that always look so nice. And then they just look like garbage because of what YouTube decided to do in the name of making them look better. And it's that work better that I think is worth thinking about, because a lot of this is justified in the name of removing imperfections. And I think that might be the worst part, because the real world is imperfect. In fact, part of being a human being is learning to accept the world in its imperfections. You have to take a world that's broken and scarred and has tragedy and just find some way to live in it. And you even need to find a way to take those parts of the world that you really care about and make it more beautiful through your actions, even though you can't fix everything. You can't use an AI filter and just pretend that the world is perfect. So far, we've only really talked about images and movies and pictures, though, but I think that the sense that things feel fake goes to almost everything. I think it even trickles down to the experiences that we have in our day-to-day lives. A few years ago, and I guess I'm talking about maybe 2022, people started talking about something that they called the Vibecession. The problem was that on paper, the economy seemed like it was doing really well. Unemployment was low, inflation was, I think, not too high yet, and the stock market was up. So these are all of the objective indicators that we use to try to measure, economic growth and health and prosperity and things like that. But many people didn't feel like they were actually better off. More people were behind on rent. There was a sense that it would be harder and harder to maintain the lifestyle that you had become accustomed to, and it felt like things were just getting more expensive. This marked a big shift. Economic data said we were living in a strong economy, the sort of economy where we're all supposed to be better off. But consumer sentiment, basically how consumers felt about the market, was plummeting. And I believe it was Kyla Scanlon who coined the phrase Vibecession over on her Substack. And she called it the vibes of a recession, but maybe not the economic reality of one yet. She identifies the break around the pandemic. That's when people started to feel like they were worse off, even if the economic data said otherwise. And part of the problem simply was uncertainty. And she wrote, the price of everything was unstable. Stores were understaffed. Teachers and their students were burned out. Public messaging had shattered. Institutions felt brittle. Everyday friction of life had increased in dozens of small ways. The COVID-era spike in home prices never unwound. Mortgages locked people in place as the Fed started hiking. Rents surged. The entry path to adulthood, where you move and rent and save and buy, shattered for many people. No house by 2020, no house ever. So for many people, the economic data no longer corresponded to how it felt to actually interact with the economy. And so the economy, as this big abstract thing, started to feel increasingly fake. You're told that houses are a great investment, but who cares if you can't actually buy a house? You're told that inflation is going down, but who cares if your wages never caught up to the first round of inflation? The more and more that economic indicators and individual experiences started to diverge, the more that the economy would feel fake. And this divergence of the things that we use to study some phenomenon in our individual experience, I think, is a big part of this larger sense that things feel fake now, which I guess I want to note is a really imprecise way of putting it. But I just hear more and more people say things like, is this fake? Or, something out in the world, to just call it fake. I just feel like I'm hearing everybody call things fake. I'm just hearing it put in a way that I really never have before. And that's what made me interested in this topic, interested enough to try and make a video about it. And there were two other factors that contributed to this. One was the rise of gambling, and the other was our fractured media environment. I think we've all seen this huge rise in gambling apps. I don't use them, and I try my best to avoid them. In fact, the only ads that I have banned from my channel, so YouTube is not allowed to run ads on certain topics on my channel, and the one that I absolutely refuse to run are gambling ads. And that's because typically I think that gambling is bad for people. It will ruin a lot of lives, and I don't want people to learn how to ruin their life through gambling through my channel. That's just a line in the sand that I felt like I had to draw. And sports betting is probably the most popular form of gambling that you will encounter today, but it's certainly not the only form. I think we all remember when Robinhood, this sort of app that lets you buy and sell and trade stocks, increasingly started to feel like people were just gambling on it, like with the GameStop stuff that happened. People were making increasingly risky investments, we'd call it, just for the hope of a massive payoff. They were treating investing in the stock market like you would, betting on the Steelers or whatever. And in the last couple of years, we have seen the rise of what are commonly called prediction markets. Now, prediction markets really don't like it when you call them gambling. And so I'm going to refrain from calling them gambling here. I'm not a guy who wants to get a lawsuit. I will try to describe them as I see them in a way that is fair and critical. In a prediction market, you can trade on real world events. The reason why it looks so much like gambling is because it looks like you're placing a bet on a certain outcome happening. And I'm just pulling up on my phone a Polymarket, which is one of the world's biggest prediction markets. And there are currently things you can buy or bet on about whether or not Khamenei is going to be out as the leader of Iran by January 31st. That has an 8% chance right now. There are bets on who Trump will nominate as Fed chair. There are things for the presidential election in Portugal, whether or not Trump is going to acquire Greenland before 2027. I think acquire is a weird word there. And you also see events that you can trade on, like football games. An entire media ecosystem has built itself up around prediction markets too, where people will bet on whether or not a certain word is said a certain number of times during a press event. And streamers will make these huge bets, and then they will just watch, and everyone's watching them to see if the streamer is going to win big or, of course, lose a fortune. And what I think this does is turn real world events not into things that we actually care about all that much, but turning them into spectacles. They basically become sources of entertainment. And I think when things become entertainment, it's really hard for us to take them seriously like we would real world events. I mean, if you're betting on Trump acquiring Greenland, right? Again, acquiring is a weird word here, but if you're betting on that, you are treating it about this event at which you might make a lot of money. That's the only reason that it would matter to you. And what you're not doing is thinking about all of the chaos that could come into the world if, the US started invading NATO allies. As the economy and all of this stuff feels more fake, we then increasingly turn to, gambling or prediction markets as a way to interact with the world. And I think this contributes to a sense of derealization, the sense that it's less real or that it's kind of more fake. But there's one final piece of the puzzle here that I think is really important, and this has to do with our fractured media environment. So if you want to learn about some event, maybe something that a politician said or about a new government policy, or you want to follow ongoing controversies like the ICE raids that have been happening in Minneapolis, you have to pick your source. Maybe 30 years ago, you would choose a particular newspaper that was available to you or watch a broadcast that was on local TV. And your options were always fairly limited. We had a couple of national shows, and you had newspapers that maybe everyone could access if they really needed to. And then you would have local options. A mid-sized city might have one or two newspapers that you could read from. So the people you talk to about those events would typically be getting their news from similar sources as you. Each of these sources, of course, had a perspective. It was not uncommon to have newspapers in the United States, for instance, that had, the words Republican or Democrat in the title. I mean, they sort of told you in the title where they stood on partisan issues, but you didn't have that many options. And that meant that you and all of the people that you would interact with who wanted to keep up on the news had to go to common sources, which probably contributed to a shared sense of reality, of like what the world was actually like. But now we have so many sources. In fact, we have too many to count. We have fewer newspapers than we used to, and there aren't that many channels that do like straight news reporting and like a standard broadcast, but we have Twitter feeds, and we have YouTube channels, we have TikTok algorithms, and we have there are blogs and newsletters that can endlessly cover all of the news in the world from 1,000 different perspectives. And most of us will consume this content in highly tailored algorithmic environments, where the kind of content that is being served to you is being served to you because it's what the algorithm thinks will keep you engaged on those platforms for as long as possible. But if you ever step out of your highly tailored algorithmic bubble, you will be shocked at what you find. You will even start to feel like the people who are watching that stuff are living in a completely different world than you. And I think this is the biggest problem that we face right now. We're all playing a big game of like choose your own reality. Because of the way that algorithmic filtering works, you are more likely to be presented with information that you already agree with. If you want news that will only ever confirm your own beliefs, you will get it. If you want content that tells you that all the people who disagree with you are evil and disgusting morons, you can get it. And if you want to never be challenged with an uncomfortable set of facts, you can get that too. Now, I don't want to go back to just like the old media days. I'm not particularly nostalgic for those days. I think there are immense positives to having more voices in a conversation, but it also opens us up to highly irresponsible and sometimes outright dishonest actors who don't particularly care about what is true. And all of this can lead to a highly distorted view of reality. In his paper, Echo Chambers and Epistemic Bubbles, C.T. Nguyen tries to define these terms that we use rather loosely when we're talking about, algorithms and our information landscape. What he calls epistemic bubbles are media environments in which relevant voices are excluded by omission. In other words, they're left out of the conversation. Many of us live in various epistemic bubbles. If you're just hanging out with your friends, you are probably in some version of an epistemic bubble. They themselves are not really all that bad, but that's different from what Nguyen calls an echo chamber. An echo chamber is an environment where other voices, like dissenting voices, are actively discredited. So in an echo chamber, it's not just that you don't hear from people who might disagree, it's that you would never believe them. He compares echo chambers to cults at one point in his paper, where in the process of indoctrination, new initiates to a cult learn to distrust anyone outside of the cult. And just like in cults, echo chambers often create their own language to make sense of the world. Amanda Martell's book, Cultish, The Language of Fanaticism, is an exploration of just this phenomenon. And in that book, she writes, language is a leader's charisma. It's what empowers them to create a mini universe, a system of values and truths, and then compel their followers to heed its rules. As an example, take Jim Jones, who was the founder of the People's Temple, and he was one of the people responsible for the Jonestown Massacre. He would often employ new phrases. Two that come up in Martell's book are bourgeois bitches and churchianity, and he would use these phrases as ways to insult people who might disagree, and thus he was actively discrediting them in front of his followers. Other groups use words like high vibration or tech to set certain groups or people apart as like a special kind of insiders, and those insiders have special access to the truth, and the outsiders don't have that access, so if they disagree with you, you don't have to try and convince them, and you certainly don't have to listen to them if they try to convince you. I'm not saying that everyone who's trapped in an echo chamber is part of a cult. What I am saying is that they have some similarities in their techniques. That's just the point from Nguyen's paper. And this is also a point that Martell makes in her book, that the word cult implies that there's like a binary. There's these special groups that we just call cults, where really she wants to call it more of a spectrum. She thinks even like CrossFit uses some of these techniques. But you wouldn't call CrossFit a cult in the same way that you would have called Jones's People's Temple. This is why Martell talks about cult-ish rather than cults in her book. So just like take a step back and think about what this language does. It makes you feel like you have the truth, and everything else everyone else believes is fake. You could even say that they've been taken in by fake news. That phrase is all over the place, but it's helpful to remember that didn't really exist until like 2015, 2016, something like that. Those people are living under an illusion, and what you want to do is like break them out of their illusion. But what you don't want to do is consider the possibility that they're actually right and you are wrong. And the increasingly fractured media environment is also highly antagonistic. So media sources don't just tell you what they think or ideally like try to tell you the truth. They actively work to discredit the competition and the people who watch the competition. So once again, you don't have to worry about the people who disagree with you. After all, like those people are the ones who believe in fake news. And if you ever hear information from them, all you have to do is say that it's fake news or fake in general, and you don't even have to worry about whether or not it might be true. At the beginning of this video, I said that in a world where everything feels fake, one of the things we lose is our ability to trust each other. And that's exactly what is happening here. All of the phenomena that I'm describing in this video are contributing to this in some way. You don't trust what you see online because there's that possibility that it might be fake. It could be AI generated, or it could be edited in a highly misleading way. You start to blur the boundaries between what is fake and what is real. And as a result, the real world itself can start to feel like the fake world, and the digital world starts to feel more real to you. And then you become suspicious of the news or people who don't live in your highly tailored algorithmic environment, or those people who disagree with you, because everyone gets to choose their own reality. And all of this undermines trust. Trust, it turns out, is pretty important for us to live together. We rely on others to learn about the world or to help each other in tough times. And we need each other, but all of that requires trust. I don't want to give easy answers to hard questions. And I certainly don't want to end this video by saying, here are the 3 easy steps for us all to learn to trust each other again. I think that the problems we face are real and severe and at such a large scale that frankly, I have a hard time looking and seeing a path forward. So instead, I just want to end this video in a way that frankly is not very compelling as a piece of content, but I think is more honest. And I just want to ask this question. Maybe you think you have part of the answer. In this world that we've built, how do we rebuild trust? People might know that I used to be an academic. And one of the difficulties I face, because I'm not an academic anymore, is getting access to academic journals. If I'm doing research for a video or something that I want to write, and there's an article I want to read, I usually have to spend a lot of time hunting down PDFs on the internet. And when I do that, I make sure that I'm using a VPN. And in particular, I use private internet access. A VPN essentially is a way for you to browse the internet more securely. It hides your IP address and safeguards your internet connection through an encrypted tunnel. This way, it can shield your digital life from the eyes of your internet service provider or network administrators, government censors, hackers, all of those people who want to find and exploit your private information. Browsing the internet without an unencrypted connection is like sending a private joke to a group chat. Suddenly everybody saw your terrible joke. A VPN provides an extra layer of security to help protect your privacy, which means that you can keep that private message private. And this means that if you're using something like public Wi-Fi at a coffee shop, you can do so with confidence. On top of that, many websites and services have content that is only accessible from specific locations, meaning, for instance, you can't access certain shows or movies on websites like Amazon or the BBC if you have the wrong IP address. A VPN lets you choose your digital location. In fact, with PIA, you can choose from 91 countries. And in the US, they have servers in all 50 states, which can allow you to get around many annoying restrictions. Private internet access works with all major streaming services, and they are one of the few VPNs that supports P2P file sharing. You can use it on Windows, Mac OS, Linux, Android, and iOS, and you only need one subscription to use it on unlimited devices. PIA is the world's most transparent VPN provider. They never record or store user data, and their no logs policy has been proven multiple times in court. And for an extra level of confirmation, this was confirmed by a third-party audit from Deloitte. If you use my link, you can get an 83% discount on PIA. That's just $2.03 a month, and you get an additional 4 months for free. You can use my link that's in the description, or you can use the QR code, which is currently on the screen. Signing up is risk-free. PIA has a 30-day money-back guarantee and 24/7 customer support. Thanks again to Private Internet Access for sponsoring this video.